Eke zuma, eke yaka hola ka zuma. Eke zuma ke bola kukama. Kangoye yame ke bola kukama ke sula. Ibe hola la e kwaiswa. Kama so ka go jola ba betona ba ta go ntsuela ke ja.
Like almost all economies based on mining industry, Botswana faces a vitally important challenge. The material that is extracted from the earth is finite. Sooner or later, it ends and leaves a significant impact on the landscape and the environment. It is necessary to think about the future, look for new ideas, plan what we can do when mining resources begin to run out. We need alternatives. The other two pillars of the economy are livestock and natural tourism. They have something in common that differentiates them from mining. Both are renewable and theoretically inexhaustible resources. As long as we maintain the ecosystem, there will be wildlife, cattle can graze, there will be livestock. However, there is a problem. Both resources compete with each other for territory, pastures, and water. They are scarce resources that need to be managed so that they are not depleted and allow our rich ecosystem to stay alive. Tourism is the second largest contributor to the country's GDP, after mining but before livestock.
Tatayala, to be honest, tourism, I think, is this, after diamonds, is the second revenue earner for the country, for Botswana. So it's a very, very important sector for the government of Botswana. I mean, after diamonds, then comes tourism. So, you know, our tourism has been, it was already talkomelo tata ka gore itisetsa puso madi hela a botoka thata. Nya ke ra gore diphologolo a ke tore ka tswarang ka e ba yang on the apex of the tourism sector. Gona ke gane tourism e khaoganye but bontsi ja ma tourist ba re ba bona ntota. Honestly speaking, they come ba batla go bona diphologolo more than anything else. Gore ke a itse gore ba bangwe ba tela a ke re dithare kana dithaba kana but bontsi ja bone tota ba batla go bona diphologolo.
We create natural parks to protect it. We are one of the countries with the most protected territory in the world. The reserves of the Central Kalahari and the Kalahari Transfrontier Park are among the 10 largest on the planet. Millions of people from all over the world come every year to visit our parks. They are a jewel that everyone admires.
Kaetora ya Kalahari Transfrontier Park le netu. Corona the migration of wildlife species between these two protected areas. Di tswa ko Central Kalahari di be di takwano di be di boela kwa. Yeah, wildlife do migrate long distances. Yeah. You see, they migrate long distances between the two protected areas of CKGR and Kalahari Transfrontier Park. And when they come here, they go, you see, migration, normally migration, what happens is that migration phenomenon, the animals move from a bad situation to a better situation. So they should be allowed to go back and forth, you get what I mean? So people should know that animals has to move up and down, you get what I mean? Yeah.
However, its existence also generates tension between local communities by reducing their access to hunting and other resources that traditionally have been their source of livelihood. Natural parks are separated from each other. Between them, there are unprotected areas. But animals do not understand frontiers. They move from one place to another, chasing food and water, leaving their protected areas and going to others or simply moving on the limits or outside the larger parks.
Yeah, no, the Kalahari ecosystem basically is a very huge area which covers as far as the Central Kalahari Game Reserve to the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. Historically, it used to be one ecosystem, like animals moving between the systems. But due to the establishment of boreholes and increasing of settlements in between these areas, some of the former wildlife habitats have been compromised, and the human population increased in that area. And the connectivity or the movement of animals between the areas sort of declined, and that indirectly also led to a decline of populations in the respective areas.
Between the Central Kalahari and Kalahari Transfrontier Park, there are corridors that connect both parks and through which the animals move along their migratory routes.
Animals are migratory in nature. They migrate so that they can, depending on the availability of food for animals and water resources. So animals move between these two protected areas in search for food and water.
These corridors, like I said, these animals on a very normal year, they will stay around the area we call the Shwele area, which is just northeast of the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. But when it gets dry and more like drought years, they need to be able to move all the way to the CKG area and beyond. And there is an increase of human population in between. So there is a need for access between the two areas. The wildebeest or the eland that are in the KTP should be able to access the Shwele area and vice versa.
They have to be those secured pathways for the animals to traverse with ease.
So these corridors are more like access routes where the animals can freely move without being interrupted by humans, traffic, or human-induced sort of disturbances or disruptions. So the corridors in these days are more like to connect the two protected areas with the recognition that the animals need to be able to move around depending on where it rained, basically.
In making these movements, wildlife competes with local communities and livestock for the same resources, soil, grasslands, and water, and conflicts with them. In addition, by leaving areas where their protection is guaranteed, they face poaching and illegal wildlife trade.
People in the area usually used to be the hunter-gatherers, but due to the technology of being able to drill boreholes and maintain livestock, they become now residential in the area. And that led to issues like human wildlife conflict because their livestock were predated by carnivores in the area, because the wild herbivores survive on migration or movement between one place to the other depending on where the rainfall had fallen and where the grass is greener. And as they move around, some carnivores naturally will follow them, and they end up maybe coming to cattle posts, killing livestock, and that is why the human animal conflict sort of increased over time.
Salake namo bohosi tota na hosena morahe o na le mokhaga yano kana kwa gompieno le ba sa khona go ka kopana ile gore ke le kgaitholo le tsole mala metoda ka ile ka go ema seseo ka dinao le gompieno yana moraho sena sa khona go ka nna mo sedibe se tshwane khaga ile moraho o tsamatsa mo nageng metoda ka thata ya mina ka le ka gore bana mo motseng ba tshwaragane ba itse gore motho ke motho ka yo mongwe ne kere ne ba tshela mo ne ma diphologolo mme segolo ne ba sa leme mo go kalokalo ebile ne ba ka nwa metsi a dipula di sena go nna mo dipaneng ba gannagana mo nageng ne re tsoma dikukama rona he nako e sampele e le ya bogologolo ne re tsoma dikukama ne re tsoma di phohu di khokong le tse dinyenyane tsa bo phuthi le tse dingwe hela yalo bonta di tau ka re ne re tshaba tau ga siama.
And the communities here were initially hunter-gatherers, but because of improvement of livelihoods, they have now established settlements. They are no longer hunter-gatherers communities around the landscape. They have established settlements. Currently, they rear livestock. Then they gather wild products for consumption and for sale. There are some communities around the landscape who also are into plowing, arable farming, and those are the main livelihood activities.
The human communities that inhabit these areas of the country live in many cases in subsistence economy with serious deficiencies and high risk of poverty. Many times in these areas, too, that the benefits provided by wildlife tourism are scarce, so that resorting to these illegal activities, such as poaching and illegal wildlife trade, becomes a vital necessity. In these environments, it becomes necessary to search, find and offer alternatives or incentives to avoid resorting to poaching or trafficking in protected species by giving the inhabitants of these areas access to other livelihoods or making them share in the benefits generated by wildlife-based tourism, thus allowing a more harmonious coexistence with wildlife. Any economic alternative that, without damaging the ecosystems, allows reducing the population's dependence on resources for which it competes with wildlife will help maintain the country's biological richness and the well-being of present and future generations. With the main objectives of knowing, reducing and mitigating the human-wildlife conflict, establishing alternatives to improve the living standards of the populations, and informing and raising awareness among the local population, the Ministry of Environment, in collaboration with UNDP, creates the Kalahari and Khanti Drylands Ecosystems Project. The project has two main lines: strengthening both the legal and operational level, the fight against poaching, and investigation and promotion of activities or resources of employing that deter local populations from these illegal activities while reducing the livestock pressure in the corridor areas.
People poach because there are no alternatives. There is poverty, there is poverty, there is hunger and all the likes. We are trying to address all those challenges by providing incentives for communities to conserve wildlife. We are saying desist from poaching. We have this as an alternative. Use natural resources in a sustainable manner.
So what we're doing in the case of the Kalahari Hansi project, there are a number of big areas and components. The first is we're providing support to bring first the various law enforcement bodies together, the wildlife, the police, the prisons and so on, so that they are a body that can have a collective information at any one time, and that information can be used then to make sure the enforcement that there's no poaching going on.
Re le badiri ba lephata la diphologolo ga re bo rotloetse go thelele jaaka nne ke sa tswa go bua la ntlha ke bolela gore ka ra tota diphologolo ga re bua nnete ke tsone tse e le gore they are on the apex of the tourism sector. Ha di ka nyelela tota yaanong bokamoso ja rona e tabe e nna ee jaanong kore re tshwanetse gore re di somarele tota yaanong rona re le batho ba wildlife tota bogodu ja diphologolo re leka by all cost gore re bo thibele.
So the idea is to make sure that we support, in this case, the technology to allow them to communicate to each other. B, the whole type of expertise around what information should they be collecting to allow them make that decision. So that's one big area. The next big area is in terms of creating opportunities for livelihoods so that the locals do not have to poach themselves.
The project is all about managing the human-wildlife interface to encourage the flow of agro-ecosystems in the Kalahari landscape. What the project entails as ensuring that there is that coexistence, and also to help curb illegal wildlife trafficking and wildlife poaching.
In addition, projects that are directly linked to wildlife tourism and that make visible the economic benefits generated by this sector are identified and promoted.
Adding on to that, they have ecotourism related enterprises along the landscape. So usually through the community-based natural resource management program, communities organize themselves, then they use natural resources within their vicinity to earn a living. So basically that is it. That one of the livelihood activities that people in the Kalahari landscape rely on.
At the same time, the project seeks to educate and inform local communities about the economic valuation of environmental resources, making them share in the benefits generated by tourism, involving them in the care and protection of the natural environment as a source of wealth and well-being.
Currently, there's an ongoing study about value chain analysis. In that study, the project is aiming to determine the feasibility, the economic viability of the community projects that can be undertaken by our different communities, to say what enterprises can be undertaken in these communities, looking especially at the use of natural resources to improve their livelihoods. So
we're also supporting what we're setting up, what we call value chains, looking at the possibility of building on work that's going on at the moment in the tourist industry and see can we create value chains here. And we are supporting developing a feasibility study exactly with the cost-benefit analysis of doing all of this, on the hope then that this will be taken up. It's another example of creating the livelihoods.
We have that study. Once the study is complete, it will give us an informed decision as to which activities and project activities that the communities can be assisted in implementing. The bottom line is that communities should earn income, improve their livelihood, so that at the end of it all, there will be reduction in poverty and hunger.
The search for new activities that generate economic benefits for the rural communities of the richest areas and wildlife, reducing pressure on wildlife as well as the frictions between both sectors, thus becomes a necessity to guarantee the welfare of populations while wildlife competes for resources with human communities that at the same time require access to resources that guarantee them decent and sufficient livelihoods.
Pele batho ba ne ba tshela ka letsomo. Go ne go na le letsomo ra safari a kgona go tswela kwa ebe a tla go hira bangwe mo motseng gore ba kgone go tsoma ebe gora gore ba duelwa nama ye tla boe mo go bolailwe tau nama ye ya tau ye go sana go tsewa letlalo nama e tla boetsiswa mo motseng for morafe e tla go hiwa morafe ba kgaogana ba eja
bogologolo tota gore go fa go itse go nete ne go tshela ka diphologolo letsomo nako ya tene letsomo ne le buletse go le go a tsongwa e le gore ke bone re benefita mo diphologolong go di bola re tla go ja nama re suga matlalo a teng a re rekisa dikgole ne go tshelwa yalo
gone yana batho ba se tlhola ba tsoma thata kore batho ba utswa dipholo motho ta ba tswa ya go utswa mme gone yana ba palo ya teng go ha we compare le pele batho ba utswang diphologolo palo ya teng ile ko tlase e ka gore batho jano ba kgona go itsetsa ba bereka bo ipelegeng ba dira madi ba kgona go reka se ba se tlhokang kore bana ba tsoma ba kgona go rekisa dinama tseo ba reka dilo tse ba di tlhokang. Trust ke group ya batho ba bane ba ikopantse ebe ba rumilwe ke morafe gore ba tsamaisetse motse ba kgone go tlhabolola motse wa bone ka ditselana tse di harologanyeng gore ba kgona go dira ditiro ba kgona go hira ba bangwe mongwe le mongwe kgona go tsosa motse wa gagwe.
Ke a go utlwa ka potso ya gago letsweile re na le didiba tse pedi tse dirisa di-panele tshwanetse re ga metsi ka tsone go tswa ko tlase be re tshela mo matamo a ka morago ga mea a matona matamo a tshwana a tlalana re pompela matamong a manyenyanenyana kore a matona ke one a tshwarang gore metsi a butswe ka bonako gore letsweile le tle le kgone go direga ka bonako be re pompela mo matama a mannyanenyana. Mme ha se no re dira jalo, se na le pompela matama a mannyane ao, re tla be re harvesta morago ga bo 3 days. Re tla be re harvesta lone letswai le re le ntsha mo teng ga matama a mannyane ao, re le beela ko ntle, e be re le tlogela gongwe bo 2 days le oma. Ha le se no le oma jalo, tla be re le tsaya re le tlisa mo warehouseng. Mo warehouse tla be re tla go le tsenya mo warehouse, be re le tsenya motšhining o tlhakanyang lone letswai le iodine, be re le package mo dikgetsing. Mme letswai le ke le berekang mo leruong, re feeda di-farmera ka lone letswai le.
Sa le jaaka project e hiwa 5 million e be e tsoga, banni ba tsutsa ba e amogetse ebile ba eme nokeng. Ha re hira o itlhele kore batho ba tla ka palo e ntsi, le ha re pega application ba apply ba le bantsi hela thata. Kgante le bile re palelwe ke go itse gore re ka hira mang, ra tlogela mang. Kore le ha ile list, ha re dira list e ka re dira waiting list, o itlhele batho ba teng le bone ba le bantsi re sa tlhoke gore re ka ba gape ra pega application.
In prevention of wildlife conflict with humans, you have to set out where's your boundaries. Because if you have the wildlife at your doorstep, that's problems. So we are supporting the gazetting first by developing integrated land use plans for an area that's over 500,000 hectares to define where are the boundaries. And then the idea is to work with the communities to make sure that the boundaries as defined are then kept to what it is they said the use of them is. Now that's a very big thing to do. And the communities are really working on defining, and part of that decisions, they will be at the table to define where are those boundaries. And being at the decisions of defining that, they can also agree and be part of, okay, that's where the wild animals are, this is where I'm going to have my agriculture, this is where I'm going to have my breeding and so on. Allows the yet another technique to make sure that the animals as well as the livelihoods have a very clear boundary.
Most people still don't see wildlife resources as their resources. I think this goes back to how the protected areas were established and how people were not involved. But I think one of the key things, the future of conservation, is to get the community to be on board, to allow them to see wildlife as an alternative resource that they can use. If you can bridge that gap, I believe you will save a lot of costs. We will save a lot of trouble of trying to kind of force people to coexist. They need to feel it. They need to see it without being told, and that is only through trying to bring them closer to conservation, through showing them benefits, making sure they actually benefit, and we don't just preach it, but they have to see it and benefit.
So the project is aiming at securing those wildlife migratory corridors and to reduce the human-wildlife conflict. To say, as animals move from the KTP to the CKGR, there should be minimal conflict between people living in the neighboring settlements. So that's what the project is trying to achieve, to secure wildlife migratory corridors.
We have already told the land board about this gazetting. We are telling them that we want to see the whole plan so that we can see some migratory corridors, wildlife migratory corridors, and some natural resources. We can find where there are some natural resources so that we conserve them and use them in future. We have a management plan so we know the areas. So if the land board calls us, then we agree. We look at their plan and try to correct the plan. So when they construct fences, we want some migratory corridors where the animals can freely move. Because we are living in a WKCC, Western Kalahari Conservation Corridor. That's why we want some corridors so that they can move from CKGR up to Kalahari Transfrontier Park and back from Kalahari Transfrontier Park to CKGR.
The bottom line is that it's the fact that there is wildlife naturally in the area, as much as they cause conflict with farmers. One of the positive side is that the wildlife actually create a tourism potential. And these areas, like the protected areas, have seen a lot of tourists coming into the area, which creates an opportunity for the community in these areas to benefit from tourism as a compensation to living or coexisting with these animals in the area. So one of the method that's been used to try and promote coexistence with wildlife is to try and increase how the communities can benefit from tourism and other uses that are related as a way of creating opportunities or diversifying what they can live on in the area.